Welcome to A's Linguistics. This channel is about all things linguistic. So let's see what we've got today. I want to move on to variation and change, and then I will go back to all those chapters or seasons that I've done. But the thing is, we have created enough foundation, and we can also go to a more advanced level on any particular topic. You need to know that there's a distinction between variation and linguistic variation. Variation in its general sense, you could define variation as difference in form. Or you could say, linguistic variation is differences in linguistic form. But we need to get more technical than that. Do you remember we discussed minimal pairs like complementary distribution, contrastive distribution? We said that sip and zip. So sip and zip are a minimal pair because sip means a different thing than zip. So here we have variation in form, which means s has changed to z. Do they mean the same thing? They do not. They mean different things. So here, difference in form has resulted in difference in meaning. Now, you can look at words. For example, the word economics. You're given two pronunciations. Economics, or you could pronounce this as economics. Now the question is, if you say economics, are you saying a different thing than when you're saying economics? You are not. So here, there is variation in form. You could say this is free variation in the sense that economics is the same as economics. So in layman terms, like if you ask a layperson what is variation, they might think of dialectal variation in the sense that, it's different ways of saying the same thing. Like you might ask for an example. So yeah, in American English you say apartment, in British English you say flat. So if you ask someone about variation, they might think of dialectal variation in the sense that different dialects use different things to say the same thing. So that's a very general way of referring to variation or dialectal variation. I gave you the example of economics and economics. This was free variation. I want to give you an example from a different language. In Portuguese, like Brazilian Portuguese, when they have the sound O, they might change it to U in the word. For example, the word boca, which means mouth, is pronounced boca. But the word tudo, which you would expect it to be tudo, actually becomes tudo. So O here changes to U. How does that happen? There's a rule based on which you can predict when to change O to U. You can predetermine based on that rule when this change from O to U happens. So when does that happen? What is the rule here? Can you guess? Based on the linguistic context, in this case phonological context, you can say there is variation in Brazilian Portuguese between O and U. O occurs in stressed syllables and U in unstressed syllables. So here you can write a rule for this in Portuguese. You can say in Portuguese, the sound O, whenever in unstressed syllables, changes to U. Now, based on that rule, if I say the word for a spleen, is this in Portuguese? So, which is underlyingly basso. So, do you think this will undergo the change or won't? How would you pronounce this? Yes, basso. So you see, once you have the rule, you can determine if there will be any variation or in what direction the variation will go. Another example. Why not an example from English? So if I ask you what is the plural suffix in English, you would say sa. But we know that sa in English can surface as sa or za or uz, right? So if it book become books, it's sa. What about dog? Is za. What about watch? Watches. Can you write a rule for that? Yes, of course. There's a rule that it is sa after voiced consonant, it's as after sibilant, so is za elsewhere. So if you ask me what sibilance is, sibilants are fricatives and affricatives with a hissing quality, these sounds. But then based on this rule, if I give you a few words, like the word variation and the word variant and the word variable, and I ask you to turn them into plural, how would you pronounce it? Variation, would it be sa, za, or az? Z, z here. Here, how do you pronounce this? Variants, because it's a voiceless consonant. And variables, again, la, it's voiced, so it becomes z. And if I say patch, the plural would be patches. Why? Because it's a ch, this is a sibilant. There is a deterministic rule based on which you can predict where a particular variant or some particular variation occurs, okay? Okay, now back to free variation, linguistic variation. So in English, the word singing is to be pronounced singing, which is a voiced velar nasal. But sometimes this is pronounced as a voiced alveolar nasal. Singing, singing, singing. Or the word west, sometimes you drop the t at the end. Example from a different language. In Spanish, entonces, which means then, is sometimes pronounced entonces. So in these cases, you cannot determine what linguistic context it is that singing becomes singing or entonces becomes entonces. There's no deterministic rule that you can write to say, oh, this is the context in which this is to be pronounced entonces, and this is the context in which it is to be pronounced entonces, or west and west, or singing and singing. This is the phonological environment or linguistic context in which this particular variant appears, and this is the other variant in this other linguistic context. So in that sense, we can't write deterministic rules for these two different forms. The simple answer to this is, well, they mean the same thing, right? So these are free variation. These are instances of free variation. In such cases, there is a difference in linguistic form, but no change in the linguistic context and no apparent change in meaning. It looks like there is no difference in meaning. So we can just dismiss it as free variation. At the introductory level, the most common answer is just to dismiss it as free variation. It means to say that the change in form is completely random and unpredictable. It's unpredictable because we cannot write a rule for it. But there's also another approach to this, which we adopt in a particular branch of linguistics called Variationist linguistics. So in Variationist linguistics, we say, yes, there is no linguistic context that conditions this difference, but if you collect a body of data, a data set that is big enough, you will see patterns in which that can explain the difference, that can explain when to use entonces and when to use entonces. There are non-linguistic factors that explain the differences. While there's no change in linguistic meaning, there may be a change in social meaning. It could be dialectal, it could be socioeconomic. So this kind of variation is called linguistic variation, and it's the subject of study in variationist linguistics. You might still feel that I understand like 60%, but 40% of it is mystery. So stick around for our subsequent videos on the topic of linguistic variation. Thanks for your time and attention, and see you again soon.